All right, everybody. I think we need a bit of energy here. Turn to the person next to you and high five them. Yeah. Oh, well done. Turn to the other person or someone behind or in front or whoever and shake their hand. Shake their hand. Shake someone's hand. Okay. And all you need to do, we need the timer. I don't see the timer on the laptop, people. So that's one thing. But while we do that, just copy me, right? Yeah, it's very easy, isn't it? Right? Okay, try again. Okay, good job. Great job. All right, so I'm super excited to be here today. What I'd first love to do is to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon whom we meet today in Melbourne. The lands of the Wurundjeri, Woi Wurrung and Bunurong Bun Wurrung peoples of the Kulin Nation. This is extremely important. In fact, when I moved to Vietnam, in my experience over there and the journey, which you'll hear from, I then became much more closer to our First Nations peoples from being in Vietnam and experiencing the process of decolonization and healing from racialized trauma. And it was such an unbelievable, unexpected experience of actually understanding more about our First Nations in Australia by being in Vietnam. So today, the journey I want to share with you is a journey of moving to Vietnam. But, first off, when people ask me about, my clients, I work as a leadership coach, a facilitator, they're like, well, how do I make decisions? And as I look back on my own life and with the work with my clients, I've come to realize that within each of us, we have a spirit that is whole and that is yearning for the fullest expression of itself. And from that space, there is a sense of being in my own power, being empowered. And from that space, it's not disempowered, it's not scarcity, it's not fear. And if we are in that space, then we unlock our creative energy. And our creative energy, every single person in this room has creative energy. It's not about creative arts. It is an energy force that makes you feel alive and energized. And we're not stagnating, we're growing. We feel alive. And so what can unlock that? And as I reflected, and developed a framework for understanding what it means to live a purposeful and your unique purposeful life, I started to realize, what it is an alignment of your heart, what you feel, your emotions, with your head, your logic, what you think, and an alignment finally with what you do, your hands. So the practicalities. And as there is that full alignment, you start to unlock a potential that's within you. And as I developed this further in my life, I developed a framework for how to make these decisions in each of these elements. And I'm running a workshop for the first time, actually face-to-face, tomorrow. And I think there are some still spots left if you would like to join. And so, I developed this framework to support myself, but also my clients. And how did I arrive at this? Well, let me start about this journey. Many of you will know that 2 million people left Vietnam after the war. 2 million people. And most of those people went by boat. Now, of those people that went by boat, 50% died. 50% died. There is a small group of unknown people to many that went by foot. They went crossing through Vietnam to Cambodia and through the killing fields during the Khmer Rouge regime, where 1/3 of the population was slaughtered. And then they crossed into Thailand. And that was my family. Of the people that went that way, 90% died. So I am the 10%. When we got to the refugee camp, it was a women's prison that had been cleared out and converted into a UN refugee camp. There was no support, and my mother, pregnant with me, lay on the concrete on the ground and gave birth to me 2 months premature. So growing up in Sydney, when we got there, it was a story of acute poverty, and it was a story of marginalisation. My mother, who was a law student in Vietnam, she became a sweatshop worker, sewing thousands and thousands of garments every single night, every single day. Some of you are nodding, and I know that you know this story too. And when there were thousands of garments that were sewn wrong, at 8 years old, I was the one that was unpicking it so my mum could sew it again. I grew up with my friends who were addicted to heroin, who were shot. This was the landscape of my childhood. I never dreamed that I could become a lawyer and go around the world, but I got a full scholarship, and it was extremely difficult. I remember when I got a full scholarship to study law, the books were $100 each, and I couldn't afford it. There was no place to study. I lived on a house where it used to be a brothel, and it was a drug den. And a friend of mine who had a van, his family was also doing big sewing loads, and so the van was empty at the back and just 2 seats at the front. So he would pick me up and we would drive to a massive construction site where they're building a big mall, a shopping centre. And we would go there because there would be floodlights. And there was enough light for us to sit in the van and study to become lawyers. When I was in law school, final year, there was a student that sat next to me, and I asked her, "What are you going to do when you finish school?" And she said, "I'm going to work for my family business." And I said, "What business is that?" And she said, "It's a fashion business." And I said, "What's the name of the label?" And of course, 10 contractors down, my mother was the lowly person sewing for that label. And so the juxtaposition of these two stark stories, her to inherit a family business, me being this, poor, lowly person, I had to question, where is my space in the world? Is my destiny predetermined? And my dad was a French-educated banker in Vietnam. And when he came to Australia, he was a factory worker. He would read French books in his break. He suffered a lot of racism. And then one day he came home to me after an abuse at work. And he said to me, "In this country, I have a mouth to eat with, but I do not have a mouth to speak with. You can be my voice." So I think from that day was an inflection point for me. And the inflection point was, how am I going to live my life so that I can be a voice not just for my family, but for many other silenced and marginalized people? So, I said to my parents, we're very poor. Why don't we get on welfare? Everyone else is faking documents and doing different things to get on welfare. And my father said, "You know what welfare is? It's taxpayers' money. They work hard. And I am not disabled yet. Your mother can still work. We need to work hard and not actually be complacent. This is integrity. This builds character. Our parents, your grandparents, our great-grandparents never asked anything from anybody. This is the Vietnamese spirit. Resilience. Yeah. And what that meant was we had no washing machine. We all lived on one little mattress. And one day I said, you know what, there's an ad in the newspaper, and it was the ad for a sex worker. So I walked into the brothel, and the owner of the brothel was very excited because she had all different skin colors and ethnicities and races except Asian. So I was a gold mine to her. So she put me in front of a client, and then at that moment, I started to feel, wow, is this what my culture and my ethnicity and my ancient, beautiful Vietnamese culture means? A commodity? I can't do it. So that meant that I had to deliver pizza, work in a factory, open up a floristry business, pick up flowers at 3 a.m. for the big markets, and work very, very hard. But that is the story of a Vietnamese family and the story of Vietnam. As I grew up, I looked at the top ASX 100 CEOs. This is what they pretty much look like. Do I see myself? This is pretty current, by the way. And then Parliament, power, and TV hosts, entertainment. And what's beautiful? I stopped putting after 2022 because I was like, it's all very similar. So what's wealthy? Who's powerful? Who has a voice? Who has rights? Who's beautiful? I never saw myself. Where am I? And so this little girl wanted to have blonde hair and blue eyes. This little girl didn't want to eat fish sauce. So what I realized was I had deep internalized racism. I had a greater reverence and an unconscious fear of white people. And it was also intergenerational. The more that I've realized and moved to Vietnam, I found that my grandfather who fought against the French, his brother was beheaded. And every time he saw a white person, he shivered. And then during the war, my father, you know, the presence of Americans and so forth, there was also a cowering when it came to white people. And then I had inherited that indirectly and also through my own direct experiences. And for students who come to Australia, and if you are lucky enough in your formative years to spend time in a country where you are actually normal, where your language is normal, where your food is normal, you have a self-confidence that actually a lot of people who grew up in as a racial minority don't have. And even though I was the first Asian person and of course the first Vietnamese to be selected to be the Australian Youth Representative to the United Nations General Assembly, and I was on the National Advisory Board of SBS, and I was on the National Committee to the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child, and I wrote things in the newspapers, etc. I did all these things. I still felt an emptiness inside me. I still felt a yearning. And so what happened was in 2007, I had a space deep inside to listen to my heart. And my heart wanted a sense of belonging. My heart wanted a sense of connection to a land that is so ancient, that is way before my time of being born. And against the advice of many people, many people, we're talking 2007, they said, don't move to Vietnam. Your family fled the country and now you're moving there. Against all of that, I used my head, I used my logic, and then my hands said, here's an opportunity, and I did the practicalities, and I moved to Vietnam to work in an international law firm. I became an international corporate lawyer. I was a chief strategy officer for a $5 billion private equity company. I was on a couple of boards, including of an Australian company, at joint ventures of education in Vietnam. And so at that point, there was an alignment of heart, head, and hands. And what I uncovered in the first few months there was when I was at my aunt's house, she brought out these pictures. And I couldn't believe it. There were pictures of my father that I had never seen before. There were pictures of a face that I had never seen before. My father's face always had worry, always had anger, always had fear. And this jubilant, light face I had never seen. And that night I had a dream, and I met the 25-year-old version of my father in the dream. And it's so vivid. I looked at him and I said, I've been looking for you for my whole life. I went to the graves and I discovered these graves. These graves have been in my family for 200 years. When I realized that, I touched the graves and I fell down to my knees. The land, the earth, I am the 6th generation. That continuity, that connection, I never experienced anywhere except there. These rice fields have also been in my family for more than 200 years. And we have a saying in Vietnamese, chôm nhau cắt rốn. The land that my actual father was born on, where his placenta is buried there and his umbilical cord was cut and buried in the earth. That lineage, that connection, the sense of values and story and heritage that runs deep, deep, way before I was conceived. And so Vietnam allowed me to connect deep into that. And what unfolded for me was actually a journey to heal. And it was a process of decolonization. It was a process of equalizing and believing, deeply believing, that we are equal, that we have been set back by war, by colonization, by racism. And I was healing from gender, racial, class trauma. And then I began to be able to relate to white people on my terms. There's a quote from Audre Lorde, and I'm going to paraphrase. The true focus of revolution is not merely to escape the oppressive situations we find ourselves in. It is to remove the seed of the oppressor that has been planted deep within us. What are the beliefs that we carry that we set ourselves backwards? So, I went to Vietnam, and not through the memories of trauma, of what people tell me or what I read about my relationship that I should have with Vietnam. I went to Vietnam and I discovered a relationship to an ancient culture and land on my terms. And I was able to do amazing things and set up the Australia-Vietnam Young Leadership Dialogue. But what was amazing was this journey unlocked potential within me that actually created a career pathway. And I developed my own company, a leadership development business. And I remember having my first big client, Fortune 500 company, all 6 CEOs from across Asia Pacific flew in, and I had a crisis of confidence. But I remember walking into that room, and I stood in that room and I said, what runs through my veins? The stories of my parents, the stories of their parents and their fathers and their mothers and the story of the land of Vietnam doesn't run through theirs. So in that room, I put my parents in one corner, my best friends in another, and I drew on a poem called Grandmothers by Maya Angelou. I may stand as one, but I come as 10,000. So I pictured all my ancestors behind me. And as a result, my business, my small little business, took me to work with these clients all around the world. I work in all different continents, all based everywhere except for Africa and South America. And I've developed and run leadership programs for the CEO of Lend-Lease Australia and the entire executive team, a leadership program for the entire partners of KPMG Australia, which is 500 people, including the chair and the CEO. And I've come to do all of this as a result of healing and reconnecting to my heritage. But that isn't actually the thing that I'm most proud of. Vietnam gave me an opportunity, a space, a distance away from Australia in order to write my book. And actually, my book was published in 2015 in Australia by Allen and Unwin. And last year, in 2024, 9 years later, it got published in Vietnam, in Vietnamese. And I can tell you, many people ask me, oh, you've come to Vietnam, how much money have you made? How scaled is your business? Blah, 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 right? Oh, how come you still only have this many apartments? And I said, I also found a husband, by the way. But I said, I think one of my greatest achievements is that when the book was published, and it was an audio book, my parents listened to the book in Vietnamese, in their mother tongue. And they listened to their own story. They became witnesses to their own life. They were validated in a way. They were seeing themselves and their story as worthy. And what was incredibly beautiful was my father, who was 80, said to my mother, because he was a product of war, traumatized, in prison. And while all of the difficulties of our life, our Australian life, were unfolding, he could never see my mother for who she really is. And as he listened to the book many times, he said, I'm now 80. And I am closer to death. But it's only now that I'm falling in love with you for the first time. And what has been so beautiful is that I've been able to, through my own journey, facilitate their healing. In 2 weeks, I will bring my dad back to Vietnam after a very long time. And I now become his guide to have a new relationship with the country of his ancestors. So I want to share with you, I know we're like a few minutes over, 4 minutes over, but I'd love to share with you a clip that I actually put together that was shown at the launch. So please enjoy.
những bước dài tìm mãi niềm hạnh phúc đầu tiên. Niềm hạnh phúc đầu tiên là em đó, là em đó. Còn đó trong căn phòng nhỏ, còn đó những tiếng ru à ý à ơi, một nụ cười mặt trời mẹ dành cho cha. Trầm lắng tiếng dương cầm, em bên tôi bên những phía đàn, cho anh gửi thời thơ vào mặt trời. Con là mặt trời mẹ dành cho cha.
So this was my decision, this was my journey. And I'm not advocating for you to follow exactly my journey. You have your own story. You have your own calling that needs to be unfolded. But you need to honor yourself with self-inquiry and giving yourself the space to deeply listen first to what is wanting to be expressed. You have a unique and purposeful life that needs to be lived, not compared to anybody else's. And what can unlock that is an understanding of what can align your head, your heart with your hands. I want to borrow from a poem called Elders by the Hopi Nation. You are the one you have been waiting for. I wish you all the very best on your journey. Thank you.